For those of us who grew up pondering the epic battles between good and evil in the franchises that we know and love, nothing was more intriguing than when the good guys and the bad guys had to come together. Case in point, this time around I'm referring to the Autobots, of course represented here by Earthrise Optimus Prime, and the Decepticons, represented here by Toy World's Hegemon. And there were occasions when both of these groups had to come together. Either it was for a good reason, or sometimes not even for a good reason. Now and then, they'd have to work together. And in fact, it happened more often than many people care to remember. So, that begs the question, what are the top 10 times that the Autobots and the Decepticons had to team up and work together? That's going to be our focus this time around in the latest GotBot Counts Down. Hey everyone, hey all, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, your most humble host, Dennis Moulton, aka GotBot. As always, man, please like, comment, share, of course, subscribe, and while you're at it, light them up, baby. And hit that notification bell, please. It helps me out a ton. It lets you know when content of all sorts goes up here on the channel. Check out Machinery of Man, The Everything Factor, Transformers Collectors, NL, The Autobot Family, Transformers vs. G.I. Joe vs. DC Universe vs. Marvel, and Autobot City Central, as well as all my social media links. They're all down in the description below. If you're in a position to help the channel to grow, you can check us out on Patreon. You can use the donate link. You can see what we offer to you through Teespring, or of course you can hit the join button right here on YouTube, baby, and become a channel member. Now, before we get into the honorable mentions, before we get into the countdown itself, I want to give a big I'm sorry to anybody last night, November the 12th, 2020, who tuned in for GotBot Goes Live at about the 38-minute mark, though we were kind of reaching toward the end of the show. The stream just cut off. Myself and Starscream Wife tried to get it back. We could not do it. It did not work. Don't know what happened. Not a clue. But it's kind of like when you're on a telephone call and the call drops and you didn't quite finish it the way you wanted to. Now, luckily, it finished at a good point, a complete thought, but it's not the way I wanted it to end. I'm sorry, for kind of having it cut off so abruptly. It's all I could do. Okay, it's Friday. That means it's countdown day. Let's jump into the honorable mentions first. And to be fair, I really am unfamiliar with most of the honorable mentions. A lot of them come from the comics. I don't like the comics. I don't know the stories, but you guys probably will. First is Mars Attacks. I know that it is an IDW story where Martians invade Earth and the Decepticons and Autobots have to put their differences aside for the greater good of fighting off the Martians, evidently. Time Wars, I know, is a classic story, I think from Marvel UK, if I'm not mistaken. It got some votes. I don't know the story. Stormbringer got some votes. Again, I don't know the story at all. Dark of the Moon, Megatron, and Sentinel Prime got some votes. Now, remember I said earlier that sometimes they come together to combat a bigger evil, and sometimes they've come together for more nefarious schemes. Well, really, Sentinel and Megatron came together for the whole Pillars thing, and truth be known, it was a play to save Cybertron at all costs, but it was the crux of, like, the bad guys in Dark of the Moon. Nevertheless, officially Sentinel Prime was an Autobot, so it does count as a crossover, even if the reason that they were working together was not very good. And the last two that ended up on the honorable mentions was Dark Cybertron. That is one story from IDW that I do know, and it's actually one of their better stories. A lot done there, man, with Shockwave. Dark Cybertron was actually a respectable story. I mean, it had a lot of problems in the editing, but the concept was a good concept, and the brief few moments when Galvatron suggested that he and Hot Rod work together to take down Unicron, and then Unicron exerted his I guess control over Galvatron and kind of smushed that idea. But that's the honorable mentions. None of those made the list. So let's jump into what the actual most important ones are with number 10 first. Coming in at number 10 is a Plague of Insecticons. Now we all know that the Insecticons officially are Decepticons, but they're pretty belligerent. And in the Plague of Insecticons, long story short, basically the Decepticons discover their long lost Insecticon brethren and are like, hey, let's get them to join our forces. Things don't work out, hijinks ensue, and really the Autobots get across the Decepticons and the Insecticons. The Decepticons get across the Autobots and the Insecticons. The Insecticons don't get along with anybody. And at the end of the day, kind of in a very belligerent, kind of funny roundabout way, both sides sort of kind of come together to kind of make sure that the Insecticons don't get the upper hand and that they are having to resort to fleeing, and the Autobots claim victory and everyone is happy. Well, kinda. As happy as you can be when your greatest victory is making the Insecticons retreat. Nevertheless, that whole concept of the two sides coming together to battle the Insecticons scored enough votes to come in at the number 10 slot. Number 9 brings us once again to the pages of IDW, and basically a lot of people there looked at when the Autobots and the Decepticons came together, kind of going against Tarn, which I don't know that whole story, but then a lot of people also voted for the simple fact that Megatron sort of renounced sides and worked with the Autobots. In fact, he became an Autobot. I don't know so much, though, if I would necessarily call that the two sides teaming up, as that was a changing sides. But nevertheless, a lot of people, when I would point that out, said, no, look, they came together. They, had a common foe. You know what? I got to go with the votes, whether I agree with it or not. And the fact that the Autobots and the Decepticons came together really through Megatron primarily is the main reason, although Cyclonus a little bit as well, is the main reason that, that took enough votes in order to take the number 9 slot. Now, number 8 is a little more familiar territory with Call of the Primitives. And we all know Call of the Primitives, that basically all the Primitives, Autobot and Decepticon, were all called together because they had to kind of stop Toradon from destroying the entire universe. And we all know that by the end of that episode, the greatest hero of them all, Grimlock, saved the entire universe. But the Autobots and the Decepticons, in their most primitive forms, came together because of their primal primitive nature. And you know what? I guess that's stronger than allegiances to Autobot or Decepticon. For that reason, and because of the votes, it solidified itself at the number 8 slot. Number 7 is really the Prime Wars trilogy. Though I had separate votes come in of the Autobots and Decepticons coming together to battle Rodimus Unicronus and Overlord and Megatronus Prime, or the Fallen if you will, I kind of lumped them all together. And there was enough that, this was able to take the number 7 slot. But really, when the Autobots and the Decepticons, especially Optimus and Megatron, though, it's kind of arguable kind of how intact the Decepticon forces were there, but when they came together, needless to say, everybody who saw it, whether you like the fiction for Prime Wars or not, knows that your main bad guys were Overlord, Rodimus Unicronus, and Megatronus Prime, especially Megatronus Prime. And that them coming together to combat them was something that was greater than the differences between them. And for that reason, it takes the number 7 slot. Number 6 takes us to, of all places, Cyberverse, and specifically Cyberverse Season 3, after the Quintesson invasion. It's really funny. When votes rolled in for the two sides coming together to combat the Quintessons, there were no votes for the 86 film, and there was 1 vote for the 5 Faces of Darkness. But the vast majority that came in was actually for the Cyberverse invasion, because we even know, if you look at the Quintesson invasion, you have Prowl and you have Shockwave. They're both under the control of the Quintessons. Here's the thing, the Quintessons were a foe that both the Autobots and Decepticons could get behind, because the Quintessons didn't discriminate in any way, shape, or form. They just wanted their robot slaves any way they could get them. And for that reason, the Quintesson invasion takes the number 6 slot. And here at the halfway mark, we have one of the most classic stories. In fact, it's come up in a couple of the votes already. The episode The Core, when the Autobots and Decepticons basically ended up having to protect themselves against Devastator, whose logic circuits became compromised, and he kind of went on like this kind of like destruction rampage, destroying Autobot Con, rocks, drills, everything that he could in his path of destruction. And of course, Devastator, being the biggest and the baddest of them all, certainly at the time, meant that the Autobots and Decepticons had to put their differences aside. Not so much, for a grand victory, as much as it was survival. I think that number 5 is a very fitting spot to have one of the earliest iterations of the Autobots and the Decepticons coming together. I think that number 5 and The Core is a very good match. Now that we're into the top 4, we have the Revenge of Bruticus. Of course, Bruticus really came into existence because of a very kind of mean-spirited and somewhat, embittered and banished Starscream. And really it ended up being that Starscream would lead them into a conflict against the Autobots, against the Decepticons, the whole thing. And the Autobots and the Decepticons actually ended up agreeing that they would destroy Bruticus. But what the Autobots didn't know is that the Decepticons had really kind of, squirreled Bruticus away, and they were going to reprogram him to be a proper Decepticon, which of course they would do. But in order to defeat him and actually take him down, they had to come together for that one moment, for that one battle, and for that reason, the Revenge of Bruticus takes the number 4 slot. Number 3 takes us to Dr. Arkeville. Remember Dr. Arkeville and the episode Countdown to Extinction, which, by the way, is also one of my favorite Megadeth albums. But nevertheless, as far as the Transformers go, Countdown to Extinction really kind of focuses around Dr. Arkeville's power core generator thing. And it was, one of those things, it was very powerful, but you gotta be careful because it could destroy the entire planet. And the Autobots and Decepticons come together and realize just how dangerous it is and that it has to be jettisoned off the planet. And what really ends up happening is Optimus Prime uses Megatron in his gun mode. They load the power core on and it gets basically shot off. Boom. It's gone. Earth is safe and their war can continue, into perpetuity, I suppose. Needless to say, though, it is one of the earliest cases and one of the best known cases of Optimus Prime and Megatron coming together. I mean, Megatron really had to trust Optimus if he was willing to let Optimus handle him in his firearm mode. For that reason, it takes the number 3 slot. Number 2 is really something that's somewhat fitting in the world that we live in, where everybody has to come together for a certain greater good, because I'm talking about the hate plague, where it turned Autobot and Decepticon red. It filled them with rage, and they would just combat against each other. And of course, we all know that it was the return of Optimus Prime that stopped the hate plague. But up until that point, the Autobots and the Decepticons were trying to do what they could to survive. And when it got down to dwindling numbers, even Galvatron cooperated with the Autobots and Decepticons. As a matter of fact, at one point he even shakes, I think it's Optimus Prime's hand, and says there'll be no more conflict today. Who would have ever thought that Galvatron would ever speak reason? Nevertheless, he did. And for that reason, this plague, this hate plague, the return of Optimus Prime, scores enough votes to tie itself up at the number 2 slot. And that only leaves us with 1. Number 1 is any time that the two had to come together to face Unicron. Surprisingly, nobody referenced the '86 movie. The votes that rolled in here were kind of evenly tied between Transformers Prime and Armada when the two sides come together. Especially Armada, when Starscream kind of sacrificed himself to show how much the Autobots and Decepticons got to come together. There was also a few references to the comics in there, but the vast majority was for Prime and for Armada. And you know what? I can't doubt it. If I had kept it all separate, 4 or 5 of these slots could have been when they came together in this continuity to face Unicron. When they came together in this continuity to face Unicron. So I just put them all together. Why not, man? Nevertheless, that makes perfect sense. They're basically coming together to take on their version thereof of the devil. And that got to take the number 1 slot. And so we've gone once again from 10 down to 1. And it was a weird one this time. There were a lot of great stories. Some of them I don't even know. Like I said, the comics ones in the honorable mentions, I really don't know. But we also had things like, what else? Times like, wow, a lot of these here. A lot of them from the comics, like in G2 when they took on the Swarm, or what else do we have here? A lot of it was G2 actually, when it comes to ones that didn't make the list. I said Time Wars. The Master Builders was another one. When Magnus and Cyclonus worked together with one of the Quintesson scientists. When Springer and I think Razor Cloud worked together. I think in Daniel's Dream, if I'm not mistaken. So there were a lot of interesting stories that I had completely forgotten about. Some I don't even know. I'd love to hear your favorites and what you thought of the list. Did your favorite stories make it or not? I appreciate you guys coming by, giving me some of your extremely valuable time. I do know, man, how important it is to you. If you're in a position to help the channel to grow, you can check us out on Patreon. You can see what we offer to you through Teespring. You can use the donate link, or of course you can hit the join button right here on YouTube, baby. While you're at it, hit the subscribe button. Stick around, man. Have some fun with us. Don't forget that somehow, some way, each and every single day, man, you do make a difference. And I look forward, baby, to the next time that you and I get together to have another visit. Either in the live streams. I swear, they'll go better. They will. We hit a glitch, but they'll go better. At the stop motion premieres of the old-fashioned way, baby, right here inside the videos.